Okay, welcome back. This is going to be lecture 7 for Asian politics. This is going to be more focused on their government, right? Section 1, the intro, they say Japan has been a democracy since the end of World War II, but this is questionable. I kind of want to push back on that a little bit. Many theorists, including the very famous Shabub and Zavorsky, um, argue that Japan was not a democracy until the early to mid 1990s when the LDP finally lost an election. Um, some scientists see democracy as sort of a scale, right? And then there are some data sets that have democracy dichotomized, like you are or are not, period. And there are different theoretical reasons and, research reasons to have different, measures of democracy. But the main argument, I think, from Zavorsky and Lamonji and Shabub, their whole team, was that you had never seen power turn over. So how could you say that had the LDP lost an election, they would have turned over power, right? And that's an important function of democracies. The willingness, when you lose an election, to turn over power without violence, without, claiming the other guy's a cheater, without um, civil conflict, whatever it is. And so, the same criticism is pointed out towards the PRI in Mexico, the Revolutionary, God, I can't remember the something Revolutionary Party. Um, but the PRI led Mexico for 70 years or more, and they didn't lose an election until the 2000s. So some data sets argue that they just flat out weren't a democracy. Like, how can you call a country that's ruled by the same party for 50 straight years a democratic system, right? And so I can kind of see it both ways. It's a tough theoretical and philosophical and even definitional problem in the literature sometimes. But anyway, moving on from there. After the U.S. defeats Japan in World War II, and really it's Russia and the U.S., like, let's be real, the emperor becomes symbolic. Like, the U.S. is like, all right, you can keep your emperor, but they can have no power, right? And so the emperor becomes a very symbolic position, kind of akin to like the queen in England, right? They don't really have power, but they can, kind of sway public opinion, and they're out there doing diplomatic stuff and, that kind of thing. Um, okay, section 2, the legislative system. So Japan is a parliament. Um, the body, the whole Congress, both houses are called the Diet, like we would call ours Congress, right? It's made up of an interesting mix, and their legislators are wildly different than United States legislators, who tend to be wealthy attorneys, kind of a history and law, this sort of stuff. In Japan, they're mostly business executives and leaders of organizations like trade unions or these really high level bureaucrats, right? And it's very nepotistic. Like, you kind of pass your seat down to your children and your grandchildren, et cetera, et cetera. Kind of like, I guess you could point out like the Kennedys or the Bushes in the United States, kind of like that sort of thing, but much more all over the government. The upper house, which doesn't have a lot of power, is called the House of Peers. They've got around 250 members. Most of the seats are chosen through single member districts, kind of like the US, but about 100 of them are chosen in a single nationwide district through a PR system. And you don't actually vote for an individual candidate, you vote for a party list, right? So, kind of an interesting deal, kind of like Germany has this sort of mixed system, right? Um, I would also point out that there's a lot of celebrities, especially in the upper house, the House of Peers. A whole lot of actors, a lot of like sports stars, especially baseball players, because baseball's huge in Japan. Um, and so it's especially on those sort of the PR seats where you need the entire country to know your name rather than just your district, celebrity really plays well, right? The lower house, just like the U.S., is called the House of Representatives. This is where most of the legislative power in Japan resides, but I would point out that they're not very powerful. The bureaucracy is very powerful in Japan. They also have a mixed electoral system since 1993. Uh, they changed it after the LDP finally lost. They changed it to it's a 480 seat House. 300 seats are chosen through single member districts, and then the final 180 are chosen through PR. And they theoretically can serve a 4-year term, but almost invariably, Japan's government does not last 4 years. The prime minister nearly inevitably calls early elections as their coalitions sort of collapse. Okay, section 3, the prime minister and the cabinet. The prime minister is the main leader of the lower house, the House of Representatives. And again, they have the legislative power in there when you compare the two houses, but neither house has much power. The prime minister chooses the leaders of the agencies, which is one of his biggest powers, honestly, because the agencies are very, very powerful organizations. One of the problems, though, that should be pointed out is that they're running like a 9-month average tenure. There's almost this game in Japan where they are constantly rolling in and out these agency leaders so that the agency leaders can't establish a rapport and understanding of the organization, uh, so that the organization itself sort of runs itself, right? Without a leader almost. It's a very interesting thing. They, again, generally have really short lasting tenures, these prime ministers. It was about 2 years up until the 2000s, and then it started decreasing ever more, right? A year and a half, and a year on average, 10 months on average, this sort of thing. And it's usually not a charismatic leader like in the United States. Their prime ministers are almost invariably these sort of lifelong bureaucratic policy wonks, right? So very, very different approach to who is a candidate in Japan than in the United States, where a lot of our candidacies tend to be charisma centered rather than sort of policy centered. Anyway, okay. Section 4, the bureaucracy. I just want to point out that the agencies are incredibly powerful. And there's a very high bar to get into government. Even in a place like the DMV, like you have to have graduated summa kind of thing, like to get these very highly sought government positions. Part 5, the legal system. They have a pretty interesting legal system. It's sort of a mix of the European and mostly French system, but then a little bit of like the American jury system. Um, yeah, it's very strange. It's sort of this mix of adversarial slash inquisitorial, right? They have 3 judges if it's a major criminal case and it actually goes to trial, because a lot of them don't go to trial. And then they choose 6 random citizens who live in the district to serve on the trial as well. So 3 judges, 6 citizens. They do have precedent, but it's more of like a suggestion um, than actually being able to tie your hands legally, like in the United States system where stare decisis is so powerful. And then judges actually are the ones who question the defendant. There aren't really like attorneys. It's not adversarial in that way, like the United States system. It's more like the Euro system, where you have a professional judge. They are questioning you. You kind of have to represent yourself and speak for yourself, even though you may have representation by an attorney. And then the judges will sort of try and nitpick by questioning through what is the truth, and then they also, obviously judge the testimony and decide whether you're guilty or not. But yeah, very different system than the U.S. system. Their Supreme Court, they're kind of set up like functionally like the U.S. system, right? They have district courts and then these higher level regional courts, and then it goes to the Supreme Court, whatever. The Supreme Court, you should know a little bit about. They've got 15 members. The Chief Justice is appointed by the Emperor, and the other 14 are chosen by the bureaucracy at the behest of a list provided by the Supreme Court. Most cases that reach that level go to what's called the petty bench. So this will be 5 justices sort of randomly chosen to hear your case. And then any major cases or constitutional cases will go to the full 15-member court. And then family courts are entirely distinct from the justice system. There is their own system of family courts that is based on sort of their Confucian tradition. Um, and then finally, I'd point out that like Japan, I mean, basically any country on earth is less litigious than the United States, right? There are so many damn lawsuits in the United States, and lawyers are everywhere, right? It's not like that in most of the rest of the world. Things sort of get resolved in the background. There's mediators. It just doesn't get resolved through formal legal means. And there certainly aren't millions upon millions of court cases being filed every year in their system. So nowhere near as litigious as the United States. All right, I'm gonna leave it there. I think that's good for the day. Thanks for being here. That's the final lecture for the unit, and I'll get the exam up tonight. Have a great day.